As a buyer here in Texas, when buying property, sometimes, especially first-time home buyers, you may not understand the process, especially when it comes to earnest money and option. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly what those terms mean and the process of those two items that will be required typically within a contract here in Texas. Hi, my name is Rochelle. I'm with WG Title, and we are a title company here in North Texas. So first, what is earnest money exactly? Earnest money is typically initial deposit that is made from the buyer, and it's usually deposited with the title company. There are some instances, or depending on the type of property you're purchasing, where the earnest money could either be deposited with maybe a new home builder, the seller directly if they do require or would rather it be deposited with them, if it's in the contract that way. Or commercial can be deposited sometimes with an attorney's office. It just, again, depends on the type of property you're looking at. But if we're just talking about your, a normal residential property that you're looking at, the TREC contract does mention the earnest money gets deposited with the title company. And really the point of earnest money is to let the seller know how serious the buyer is typically. And so with that, the deposit amount is usually 1% of the purchase price. And again, it just makes sure, the buyer deposits funds. And if something were to happen within the contract, whether it gets terminated or something happens between the buyer and seller, those initial funds are in the title company's escrow account to then either refund it based on what happens within the contract time frame. Earnest money is required within a TREC contract, typically to be deposited within 3 business days of the execution of the contract. Execution is whenever buyer and seller have both agreed on the terms of the contract and both assign with their final agreement. So from that day moving forward, the next day is day 1, and then it goes on thereafter. And with the earnest money deposit, that doesn't go away when you deposit it. It does get applied toward your closing costs at the end of the transaction when we're ready to close. That goes toward the purchase of the property. Unless, of course, you do terminate outside of the option period, that is going to then potentially, and it is not for us to determine, but it is something that the buyer and seller will have to agree on what happens with the earnest money if the contract gets canceled, which that jumps into the option period. So with the option period, of course, there is another deposit that is made for the allowance to have the option period. And that deposit typically can range anywhere between $50 all the way up to $500. It usually depends on how much your purchase price is. The option fee allows the buyer to terminate the contract for any reason within X amount of days of the contract. It is not a specific rule in the contract. It is just whatever's negotiated between you and the seller. Now, if you are canceling the contract or terminating it for any reason during that time frame of the option period that you're given, whether that's 5 days, 15 days. I've seen some commercial contracts have an option period of 60 days. Just again, depends on the type of property you're buying. But within that option period, if you terminate at that point, it is usually written into the contract that the earnest money goes back to the buyer if you're canceling in that time frame. But if you don't cancel and you do move forward and you proceed with closing as normal, then that earnest money deposit gets applied to your closing costs. And let's talk about if you do actually decide to terminate the contract. So what to do, the steps. If you do have an agent involved, then you do need to reach out to the agent, and there is a separate form, and there are 2 extra forms actually. There's one that's called Notice of Termination, and then there's another form mentioned that is Release of Earnest Money. So depending on the scenario of how the contract is getting terminated, either one or both of those forms will be needed. And so you can just reach out to your real estate agent and they can get those forms completed for you based on the way the contract finally terminated, and they can reach out to all parties at that point. And so as long as we make sure that the title company gets it within that time frame of the option period, or whatever this scenario is in the case that the contract is getting terminated, the title company does need to be notified, one of the first parties, along with, again, the seller. So in summary, these 2 items that are typically, again, within a contract, earnest money and option. Again, earnest money is for that security deposit for the seller to know, that you're serious and that you are here interested in purchasing the property. And then the option fee, of course, allows you that time frame to really evaluate the property and determine whether or not that is a property you want to buy. If you do end up having any questions about the specifics of the Earnest option, or you like this video, feel free to reach out to us or share with your friends, and we'd be happy to help, or you can even leave a comment down below.